Andreas, so thank you for coming to Poland. You have extensive knowledge about other countries and evidence on improvement or declines around the world. So tell me, you see the Polish results are declining. They decline more than in other countries. At the same time, we also see decline in OECD countries. And still, Poland is above the average. And I think we are the country, the system, which has to think how to improve from above the average to excellent. This is what we are aiming with our reforms. What would you suggest for us?
Yeah, first of all, I think you can look at a quite positive long-term trajectory. I think the declines is a fairly recent phenomenon following, I think, many years of really good improvements, which shows Poland has the capacity to transform its educational paradigms. You know, as you say, it takes a very different set of policies to move from poor to adequate, from adequate to good, and from good to great. You know, the difficulty is that to move from good to great, it's all about capacity. You need leadership capacity, the kind of vertical mechanisms in education that get you to adequate will not work to get you from good to great. You need much stronger kind of lateral capacity in the system, you know, things like teacher professional communities, good collaboration across the school system, good generation of knowledge of what makes policy effective. And that's much harder to establish. It's easy to tell teachers what to do. It's much harder to get teachers into a space where they are not just doing good things, but also sharing what they know with their colleagues and working together to build professional practice. No?
So it's more about cooperation, this professional cooperation in the system, rather than leadership from top to the bottom.
Yeah, it's leadership at every layer of the system, really. You know, you need people who see themselves as part of a system, rather than just have a kind of atomized culture. I do what I do in my classroom. So teachers who are willing to share what they know with their colleagues, who are willing to test some of the assumptions, to do research design. You know, teachers are not just implementing, you know, things, but they see themselves as part of the knowledge generation. If you think about the fast-moving environment today, you know, whether it's technologies or, you know, immigrant populations making societies more diverse, these are all challenges teachers could not have been prepared for before they enter the school. You really need to put the emphasis on getting people at the front line to reinvent their profession every day, as we expect from, I do think, every profession.
So they have to be much more reflective, and this is interesting for us because in Poland we still see this toxic relationship, I would say, at different levels. Everyone is blaming the other side for not doing what they want, while there is little cooperation. On the other hand, we have some autonomy in the system, and during the pandemic we saw, for example, that the best things were happening at a very local level when principals or local governments took the leadership and were supporting teachers and students. But so what kind of structure we should think about to how to change this situation, you know, how to move from this still hierarchical system when we do not cooperate that much to the system we see in world countries?
You know, I think, I'm sure there are many really good things happening at local levels, but the question is how you can make local practice good and shared practice, and how can shared practice become culture. And for that you need quite robust institutions. Now you need to have a culture of evidence, that evidence that is generated at a local level feeds into a kind of systemic architecture, is shared, is mobilized, is coherently applied. You know, professional or autonomy doesn't mean I do what I want to do or like to do. Autonomy or professional autonomy means I do what I know is right in the name of my profession. So that you have teachers making judgments based on sound evidence and shared practice. And I think that you need to have the kind of evidence-based culture in the system where the teachers are knowledge users, knowledge creators, where there is a way to access that professional wisdom for anyone who's coming new into this. And I think that's really the kind of architecture that modern systems are about. And government becomes an important knowledge broker. Someone who actually mediates, moderates that evidence, structures it around new kind of curricular paradigms. I think that's the role that we need to see in the system today.
So this is what we actually now discuss in Poland, right? We have curriculum reform, which is developed by my institute for the Ministry of Education. But at the same time, what we are discussing is that we don't want this top-down approach. We want to involve teachers in designing curricula, discussing it with us, and then later collect evidence and reflect on that, right? Because I don't think that this policy implementation, we just give one shot, implement everything, and you pretend everything works is excellent, is not something we can do now. But can you give us some countries from which we could learn, or even solutions on how to move from great to excellent, and how to encourage this kind of professional exchanges?
Well, if you look at the education systems that came out on top in PISA, Shanghai in China, they have, a very robust culture for that. If you are a teacher and you want to try out an innovation, it's actually easy for you to get, a grant or support from the government to do that. But at the end of the school year, when you've found out, that it works, the government will not judge you, it's good or bad, or right or wrong. They will tell you, well, show us that you can replicate this in 10 other places, in 10 other schools, with other people, in other places. And if you're successful, maybe one day you become an experimental school. So there is an incentive of people to contribute. They also have a digital platform where teachers can share their ideas, their practices, and the more other teachers will, use your ideas, criticize your ideas, further develop your ideas, the more you will get recognition in the profession. And at the end of the school year, your school principal will not only ask you how well did you teach the kids in your class, but what contribution have you made to the profession. It's what we do with academics. In research in academia, you do not publish because you're paid for that. You publish because you want to make a contribution to your profession. That's where you get your recognition. But in school education, that's still a foreign kind of concept. We treat teachers as recipients of wisdom rather than as generators of wisdom. But that has a very strong culture in that. And not surprisingly, they reinvent teaching every few years, bottom up, but in a shared culture. So that they know when things work and when things don't, and everybody will figure that out. That's just one example, very strong kind of professional culture. The Netherlands is another interesting system where schools are pretty much on their own. There is nothing in terms of a kind of uniform education system. Every school is follows its own kind of curricular paradigm, its own pedagogical ideas. But they work in a system that is actually very, very good in knowledge mobilization. So teachers move, schools move, students move, and that really creates a continuous flow of knowledge and experience across the system, and produces remarkable coherence for a system where you wouldn't expect it. Now, actually, you can see same level of system coherence, even more than you would see in the case of Poland, despite having a very different kind of culture. So I think creating that kind of architecture where knowledge becomes systemic. It is not relying on vertical or top-down flows, but on very good lateral kind of structures now.
So government creates infrastructure, let's say, in which these professional exchanges can.
Plus, I think you need to also invest in documenting, managing the kind of evidence that is generated. I think that's also really, really important. That doesn't happen by itself. If you look to, I'm a scientist by background, in science there are huge investments that, public policy makes in the infrastructure for doing experiments, but also for knowledge creation and knowledge management in the system. And I think that's very important. You look at the, Education Endowment Foundation in England, that costs money, but it's a huge value for professionals to access that evidence in bite-sized form. Teachers are very busy people. Actually often, there is a disconnect between the research generated in universities and what teachers need in their own classroom. And to be a really good interface takes effort.
I know, I'm a researcher, so I know how difficult it is to grasp some ideas from research and put it into practice. But that's encouraging, because we are now discussing partnership with Education Women Foundation, and I also was surprised with the Dutch system, that it was so consistent and so professional, and these discussions were really, this professional exchange was everywhere, right, in a very decentralized system. But let's talk about OECD countries in general. What we see, the decline in scores over last 20 years. I mean, it's small and then a little bit larger after the pandemic. How would you explain that? I mean, this negative trend and now the decline across OECD countries. Of course, there are exceptions, but overall there is this negative trend.
Yeah, you know, we have seen rising demands placed on education in terms of what young people need to be able to do, and we have seen external pressures on education systems that have been unprecedented, particularly, you know, more diverse student populations. And then the big unknown, technology. You know, there is, I think, now pretty consistent evidence that, you know, the way we read today is no longer as, you know, deep as we used to read, you know, 10, 15 years ago. Now, when we had to engage with more complex kind of information structures. And all of those forces have meant that the demands on education have risen, and supply hasn't changed. I mean, education hasn't reinvented itself in the same way as other sectors have. Now, in a way, you know, when I went to school, reading was about extracting knowledge from basically linear texts. That was, you know, required one set of methodologies to teach. When I had a question, I could look it up in an encyclopedia and trust the answer to be right. You know, so teaching people answers was the right thing to do. Today, you know, in the world of Google and ChatGPT, when you look up something, you never know what is timeless wisdom and what is, you know, idiosyncratic, you know, in that. So, you know, reading is a completely different skill set. It's no longer about extracting knowledge, it's about constructing knowledge. It requires a different set of pedagogies, and that has not happened. In a way, I think we have still, you know, again, you know, my background as a scientist, you know, sometimes it breaks my heart when I see how we teach science like religion. Now we make people believe in some scientific theory, then we give them lots of exercises to practices, and then we test whether they remember our answers. Nothing to do with science. Science is always about inquiry. It's never about reproducing what we know, but questioning what we know. And again, education hasn't made that transition. And we pay an increasing price for that. And I think that's that disconnect between what the world requires and what young people need to know is becoming evident in scores. You know, I don't believe that the pandemic had as much of a role in this as people think. You know, I do think these are much more structural, you know, developments that we should take really serious now.
I agree, although if you say that we are reading differently now, I mean, we cannot focus on longer texts. I mean, I think every one of us experiences that we no longer can sit down and read a book for 2 hours as we used to, because we are used to, you know, getting information very fast and in small chunks. On the other hand, what's the solution here? I mean, for schools, because some people say we shouldn't really, I mean, some people say let's make classes like TikTok really, right? So kids will focus on us, they will listen to us, it will be attractive to them. But is that a solution really? Some people say it's not, school is the only place where they can focus for 15 minutes and read a longer test and discuss it. Some people say also, for example, that it's true that you need different skills to understand information online. On the other hand, you still need knowledge to evaluate it, right? Because if you don't, then ChatGPT is a mindless, machine which will give you some quick solutions, but you cannot evaluate them. You are not, you don't know what is right. So maybe, so. I agree we don't have a new paradigm, right? But what do you think? Would that be a completely new paradigm, or maybe a mixture of traditional knowledge-based teaching, but in a new context?
Yeah, interesting question. School is an expensive enterprise. If we want to justify school as opposed to just relying, you learning on technologies and so on, I do think we need to focus on what school can actually add to society as a social enterprise, as an enterprise that actually can help you, learn in a context deep reading skills. That makes you actually, study a book of 100 pages and, engage with different characters, different viewpoints. School is a place where you meet people who think differently from you. In the digital world, you're going to work with people who think like you, look like you, walk like you. In school, we can use school as a kind of place where you engage with, different ways of thinking, different ways of walking. And I do think that's the responsibility. If school becomes like TikTok, let's use TikTok. TikTok is better at that than school will ever become. So I do believe we want to justify school, we should use it at what it's best. And I think those deep ways of thinking, can you think like a scientist? Can you think like a mathematician? Can you think like a philosopher? That's not what you learn on TikTok. And I do believe, we should not degrade school to accommodate, the kind of fads of every day. We should use school at what it's best and what justify the significant investment that society makes in that institution. Otherwise, we will educate second-class robots, not first-class humans.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.